He had spent decades building a life where nothing unexpected was allowed to happen. Every morning followed the same quiet routine. The same office. The same coffee. The same peaceful silence inside the walls of his large villa. It was the kind of life that came with power, wealth, and careful control. But the morning his new maid arrived, something felt wrong the moment he opened the door. Not because she said anything unusual, not because she seemed nervous, but because the instant their eyes met, a strange pressure tightened in his chest, the unsettling feeling of recognizing something you thought had been buried long ago. He studied her face again, the eyes, the smile, the quiet way she stood there waiting to be invited inside. For a brief second, a name he had not spoken in 30 years surfaced in his mind. A woman he had once loved. A woman he had once left behind. Mr. Holt quickly pushed the memory away, because the truth behind it would have been impossible to accept. Yet the quiet young woman standing at his door carried a past he had spent 3 decades trying to forget. And before the week was over, a single photograph would force him to confront a secret he believed time had erased forever. They say that time hides our mistakes, but time does not erase them. It only keeps them safe until the right moment comes to bring them back. If you are new to this channel and you love stories that reach deep and stay with you long after they end, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. You will not regret it. This is a story about what happens when the truth decides it has waited long enough. The morning had started the way every morning started in the Holt estate, a sprawling stone and glass residence set back from a private road in the most exclusive neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina. Quiet, controlled, every surface polished, every object in its assigned position. The grounds crew had already come and gone by 6:30, leaving the hedges trimmed to geometric precision and the gravel drive raked into neat parallel lines. Inside, the house hummed with the particular emptiness of a space that was too large for one person, but had learned not to complain about it. A chandelier hung in the foyer that could have illuminated a ballroom. A dining table stretched long enough for 12 guests sat each evening with a single place setting at its head. The house was magnificent, and it was lonely, and Raymond Holt had long ago stopped noticing the difference between the two. Raymond was 63 years old. He stood 6'2" with a full head of silver hair that he kept cut close and neat, broad shoulders that had not yet begun to round, and dark brown eyes that communicated more in silence than most people managed with paragraphs. He had built Holt Meridian Properties from a single renovated duplex in his late 20s into one of the largest privately held luxury hotel and real estate companies on the East Coast. 47 properties across 9 states. 3,000 employees. A net worth that financial magazines estimated somewhere north of $1.4 billion, though Raymond never confirmed or denied the number. He considered it vulgar to discuss. He had been married once, briefly, in his 40s, to a woman who had loved the idea of him more than the reality. The divorce had been clean, expensive, and final. No children from that marriage. He had made sure of it then, which was its own kind of cruelty, though he did not allow himself to examine that thought too closely. He was sitting in his study that morning, a room lined floor to ceiling with books he had actually read, reviewing projections for a hotel acquisition in Savannah when he heard the knock. Soft. Respectful. Exactly 3 taps, evenly spaced. He knew who it was before he looked up. Lorraine had always knocked the same way in 12 years of service. She was standing in the doorway in her gray uniform, hands clasped in front of her, her expression carrying that particular careful quality that people wear when they have something difficult to say and have been rehearsing the delivery. Raymond set down his pen. He had known Lorraine Baptiste long enough to read the weather on her face. Whatever she was about to say had weight to it. She came in and sat when he gestured to the chair. She placed her hands on her knees and took a slow breath and told him she was leaving. Not because anything was wrong. Not because she was unhappy. Because she had been accepted into a licensed practical nursing program at the community college, something she had been saving for quietly, month after month, for the last 4 years. She was 51 years old, and she was going to become a nurse. She said it with her chin lifted slightly, and her eyes bright, and Raymond felt something move through him that he recognized as genuine admiration. This was a woman who had spent over a decade making another person's life run smoothly, and she had been building something of her own the entire time without ever asking for attention or credit. He told her he understood. He told her he was proud of her, and he meant it completely. Then he told her the truth, which was that this house without someone managing it was a machine without an operator, and he could not do it alone. He said it without drama, simply as a fact. The way he said everything. Lorraine nodded. She had anticipated exactly this. She told him she had already thought of someone. A young woman she had known for years. A former neighbor from the apartment complex where Lorraine had lived before moving closer to the estate. Hardworking, calm, honest in the way that mattered, not the loud performative kind, but the kind that showed up in how a person treated a room when nobody was watching. Raymond's eyes narrowed the way they always did when someone presented him with a variable he had not evaluated himself. He asked questions. How well did Lorraine know her? What kind of work had she done before? Why was she available? Lorraine answered each one directly, without selling, without overstating. The young woman's name was Naomi. She was 29. She had been working inconsistent jobs since aging out of a scholarship program that had supported her through high school and community college after her mother passed away. She was reliable in the way that people who have had to rely entirely on themselves tend to be. Raymond studied Lorraine's face for several seconds. Then he gave a single nod. Bring her tomorrow, he said. If you trust her, I will trust your judgment. Lorraine smiled, wide and warm, the kind of smile that transformed her entire face. She thanked him, stood, and walked back to the kitchen with the quiet efficiency that had defined her presence in this house for over a decade. Raymond watched her go. He felt a small pang of something he would not have called sadness, but which lived in the same neighborhood. Change, even good change, always carried a cost. He picked up his pen and returned to his projections. The numbers on the page were the same numbers they had been 5 minutes ago. But something in the room had shifted, a low hum of anticipation that he could not explain and did not try to. He simply noted it the way he noted everything, filed it somewhere behind his eyes, and continued working. Outside, the city moved forward the way cities do, loud and indifferent and relentless. And somewhere across town, a young woman named Naomi was about to receive a text message that would change the trajectory of everything. Naomi Parker lived in a third-floor apartment in a building that had seen better decades. The elevator worked about half the time. The hallway carpet had been replaced at least twice in the years she had lived there, each time with something slightly cheaper than what came before. Her apartment was small. One bedroom, a bathroom with a shower that ran hot for exactly 7 minutes before turning cold, a kitchen that doubled as a living room, and a single window that looked out onto the fire escape and, beyond it, the back wall of a laundromat. The walls were thin enough to hear conversations in the neighboring units, and the radiator made a sound in the winter like someone gently tapping a wrench against a pipe, which was more or less exactly what was happening inside it. But the apartment was clean. Ruthlessly, deliberately clean. The kitchen counter was scrubbed every night. The bathroom tiles showed no trace of grout discoloration. The single window was washed every 2 weeks, inside and out, Naomi balancing on the fire escape to reach the exterior glass. She kept it that way not out of obsession, but out of principle, the same principle her mother had taught her. You cannot control what the world gives you, but you can control what your hands do with it. Her mother had said that while scrubbing the kitchen floor of the 2-bedroom apartment where Naomi had grown up, down on her knees with a brush that she replaced every 3 months because she believed the tools of your work deserved to be kept in good condition, and Naomi had never forgotten it. On the shelf above her small desk sat a framed photograph. It showed a woman in her early 30s, dark-skinned, with wide-set eyes and a smile that was not posed for the camera, but caught mid-laugh, her head tilted back, one hand raised as if waving away whatever joke had just been told. She looked free. She looked like someone who had figured out how to be happy without permission from anyone else. Her name had been Denise. Denise Elaine Parker. She had been a home health aide, spending her days in other people's houses caring for their elderly parents, changing bandages, measuring medications, reading aloud from books she would never have chosen for herself, coaxing reluctant patients to eat their meals with a gentleness that never felt like pity. She worked long hours for modest pay, and she came home tired most nights, but she never came home empty. She always brought something back for Naomi. A library book she had picked up on the bus. A small bag of the good chocolates from the drugstore on 5th Street, the ones with the soft centers that Naomi loved. A story about one of her patients that she told over dinner with the skill of a woman who understood that laughter was a form of currency more valuable than anything in her paycheck. She made the small apartment feel abundant not through possessions, but through presence. She was the kind of person who could make a Tuesday evening feel like an event simply by being fully in it. Naomi had been raised by this woman alone. Completely, entirely, without interruption or assistance. She had known only one parent, one voice calling her name in the dark when she had a nightmare, one pair of hands braiding her hair before school, one person in the audience at every recital and graduation and parent-teacher conference who clapped loudly enough to sound like two. Naomi used to look around at the other kids' families in the audience and count the people there for them, and then look at her mother, one woman, one pair of hands applauding with everything she had, and feel something that was not quite sadness and not quite pride, but somewhere between both. Her mother had never married. She had never dated anyone seriously, at least not that Naomi had seen. And she had spoken about Naomi's father exactly once. It was a spring evening when Naomi was 7 years old. She had come home from school with a question that had been building pressure inside her all day. The class had been making Father's Day cards. Construction paper, glitter glue, crooked handwriting. Every child around her had been writing messages to their dads. Some wrote, "Best dad ever." Some drew pictures of fishing trips and basketball games. Naomi had sat at her desk with her blank piece of paper and her markers and had not known what to write. The teacher, noticing her stillness, had said gently that it was okay to make a card for a grandfather or an uncle or anyone special. Naomi had made a card for her mother instead. She had written, "You are everything," in purple marker and drawn a heart around it. But the question had followed her home like something attached to the bottom of her shoe. "Where's my daddy?" Denise had been quiet for a long time after Naomi asked. She was standing at the stove stirring a pot of soup, and her hand had slowed but not stopped. The kitchen was warm with steam, and the small overhead light made everything golden. When she finally spoke, her voice was level and careful, like someone walking across a frozen pond, testing each step before committing their weight. "His name was Raymond," she said. "We were young. He was building something with his life, and a baby did not fit into what he was building. So he left." She paused. The spoon went around the pot once more. "He left before you were born, and he never came back. Does he know about me?" Naomi had asked. Denise's hand stopped stirring. The kitchen went very quiet except for the low bubble of the soup. "He knows," she said softly. And then she turned from the stove and looked at her daughter, and there was something in her eyes that 7-year-old Naomi could not fully read, but would understand many years later. A mixture of old hurt and fierce protection and the absolute refusal to let either one define what came next. "But we do not need him, baby," Denise said. She crouched down so she was eye level with Naomi. "We have never needed him. And we are enough. Do you hear me? We are enough." Naomi had nodded because her mother's voice carried the kind of certainty that made nodding the only possible response. And she had not asked again. Not because the question went away. It never went away. But because she learned to carry it the way her mother carried everything, quietly, without complaint, tucked somewhere deep enough that it only surfaced in the still moments when there was nothing else to distract from it. Late at night in bed, walking home from school alone, sitting in church on Father's Day when the pastor asked all the fathers to stand, and Naomi looked at the floor and told herself it did not matter. Her mother got sick when Naomi was 15. It started as fatigue that would not lift, a tiredness that sleep could not fix, that sat behind Denise's eyes even when she smiled. Then headaches. Then a day when Denise could not get out of bed and Naomi called the ambulance herself, standing in the kitchen in her pajamas, speaking to the dispatcher in a voice that was calm because someone needed to be calm and there was no one else available for the job. The diagnosis came quickly and the prognosis came with it, and both were delivered in the particular low tone that doctors use when the news is very bad, and they have learned to say it without letting their voices break. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctor explained what this meant in careful language designed to be understood, but also designed to leave a small door of hope open, the way doctors do, because hope is sometimes the only medicine that still works. Denise had listened and nodded and asked 3 questions that were all practical and none of which were about herself. She asked about Naomi's school. She asked about her insurance coverage for the hospital stay. She asked whether there was a social worker who could help with arrangements. She did not cry. Not in front of Naomi. Not in front of anyone that Naomi ever saw. Denise died on a Wednesday morning in April. The hospital room was filled with light from the window that a nurse had opened earlier, bright and clean in a way that felt almost inappropriate for what was happening. There were flowers on the bedside table from a coworker, already beginning to wilt, their petals curling inward like hands closing. Denise had held Naomi's hand, her grip weak but deliberate, and looked at her daughter with eyes that were clear and present and full of something that went beyond words. She said Naomi's name once, soft and complete, the way you say a word that contains everything you have ever wanted to say and will not have time to say again. And then she was gone. The monitors changed their rhythm. A nurse moved quickly into the room, and Naomi sat there holding the hand that had braided her hair and baked her birthday cakes, and been the only constant in her entire life, and felt the world become a different place than it had been 30 seconds before. She was 15 years old. She was alone, and the question she had carried since she was 7 now had no one left to answer it. She had survived. That was the word she would use years later when people asked how she managed. She did not think of it as thriving. She had been placed in a group home for 6 months where she learned to sleep lightly and keep her important things in her pillowcase. Then she was transferred to a foster family who were kind enough but stretched thin with 3 other children and limited space. She had finished high school on a scholarship for orphaned youth. She had taken classes at the community college, studying accounting because it was practical and because numbers, unlike people, did exactly what they were supposed to do every time. She had worked jobs that appeared and disappeared with the regularity of seasons. Grocery store clerk for 2 years until the owner retired and closed down. Cleaning service crew member, where she learned the discipline of making someone else's space perfect. Receptionist at a dentist's office that shut down when the dentist moved to another state. She had learned to be adaptable, resourceful, and absolutely self-reliant, not because she was naturally tough, but because there was no one else available to be tough on her behalf. She had built a small life. It was not glamorous or comfortable or even particularly stable, but it was hers, earned by her own hands, maintained by her own discipline. And she had carried the unanswered question about her father through every part of it like a stone in the bottom of a bag that she had simply grown used to lifting. Lorraine's text message arrived the evening before. Got something for you. Might be good. Come by in the morning. Naomi had smiled at her phone. Lorraine was one of the few people in her life who had shown up consistently without being asked and without expecting anything in return. They had been neighbors for 3 years in the apartment building on Cedar Street. Lorraine was the one who had knocked on her door the week she moved in, carrying a plate of jollof rice and a warm smile and no agenda whatsoever. That kind of friendship was rare, and Naomi protected it the way she protected everything precious, quietly and completely. Now she finished ironing the blouse, put it on, looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror, and decided she looked presentable. She glanced at her mother's photograph on the shelf. She did not say anything out loud. She simply looked at it for a moment the way she did every morning, a silent acknowledgement, a ritual of remembrance that took no more than a few seconds but anchored her entire day in something real. Then she picked up her bag and walked out the door and down the 3 flights of stairs and out into the morning. The bus took 35 minutes. Naomi stood near the window and watched the city change as the route moved from the dense grid of downtown through transitional neighborhoods and into the wide, quiet streets where mature oaks and stone walls and iron gates signaled a different kind of existence entirely. She got off at her stop and walked 2 blocks to the address. The whole estate announced itself before she reached the gate. The wall was old stone, 8 feet high, covered in carefully managed ivy. The gate was wrought iron, black, with a small intercom panel set into the stone column. Beyond it, a gravel drive curved through manicured grounds toward a house that looked less like a house and more like a statement about what money and solitude could build together. She pressed the intercom. Lorraine's voice came through almost immediately. The gate opened. Naomi walked up the drive, her eyes cataloging everything. Rose beds in geometric patterns. A Japanese maple positioned precisely where the morning light would catch its leaves. Hedges cut with mathematical accuracy. Every stone in the pathway level. Every edge clean. Someone likes things a certain way, she thought. Lorraine met her at the front door, beaming. She pulled Naomi into a quick, firm hug and led her inside through a foyer that smelled of wood polish and old leather, down a hallway lined with framed photographs and paintings. The floors were dark hardwood, polished to a reflection. Everything was immaculate, and the overall effect was of a house organized by someone who believed that disorder was a personal failing. Lorraine told her to wait in the front parlor and disappeared. Naomi sat on the edge of a leather chair and looked around at the high ceilings, the tall windows, the shelves of books, the silence that was full rather than empty. Then she heard footsteps. Steady, unhurried. The sound of expensive shoes on hardwood. And Raymond Holt appeared in the doorway. He was taller than she had expected. Silver-haired, dark-eyed, wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled precisely to mid-forearm and charcoal trousers. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that does not need to announce itself because the room has already made space for it. He looked at her. Something happened. Nothing visible from the outside. No gasp, no widened eyes. Just a pause so brief it barely registered, a flicker behind his expression like a candle touched by a breath of wind that came from nowhere. His eyes met hers, and something behind them shifted in a way he could not name. A feeling of recognition without memory. Like hearing a melody you are certain you know but cannot place. Cannot recall where you first heard it or why it reaches somewhere deeper than the surface of your mind. He blinked and it was gone. "Good morning," he said. His voice was even and controlled. "You must be Naomi." "Yes, sir. Good morning." He studied her face for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary, so briefly that she barely noticed it. Then he gestured toward the sitting room. "Come in. Let us talk." She followed him inside. Neither of them mentioned the strange charge that had passed between them when their eyes met. Neither of them had the vocabulary for it yet. It was simply there, humming at a frequency below language, like a note struck on a piano in a room where no one was supposed to be playing. The interview was brief and direct, the way Raymond conducted everything. He asked about her experience. She told him plainly. Cleaning service work, 2 years of housekeeping for an elderly woman who had since passed away, various temporary positions. She did not embellish. She did not apologize. She presented the facts of her working life the way she had lived them, without decoration. He asked whether she understood that his household ran on precision. She said she did. He said he was not a difficult man, but he was an exacting one, and he asked her whether she understood the difference. She looked him in the eye and said, "Exacting means everything has a right way. Difficult means nothing is ever right enough. I can work with exacting." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Almost a smile. Brief enough to be deniable, but real enough that she noticed it. He offered her the position. 6 days a week. Sundays off. She could live in the guest cottage behind the main house or commute from her apartment. She chose to commute. She said she was used to her own space and preferred to keep it. He did not question the choice. He simply nodded, as if he understood completely, and perhaps better than most people, the need to maintain a territory that was entirely your own. The interview was over. He stood. She stood. They shook hands. His grip was firm and brief. He told her Lorraine would show her around the house and explain the routine. She could begin properly the following Monday. Then he stopped. He was halfway to the door, his back already turned, and he paused without turning around. "Naomi," he said. A silence so brief it almost was not there. "Welcome." And he walked away down the hall. She She watched him go and felt again that strange humming sensation that had appeared when their eyes first met, present and inexplicable, like the vibration that lingers in the air after a bell has been struck, long after the sound itself has faded. Lorraine spent the rest of that first morning showing Naomi through the house room by room, speaking in a low, efficient voice, the voice of someone passing on knowledge they had spent years accumulating. The kitchen first. She opened every cabinet and pointed to where each item lived. The coffee mugs arranged by size. The plates stacked in groups of 4. The spice rack organized alphabetically, which Naomi found both impressive and slightly alarming. Every single thing goes back exactly where it came from, Lorraine said. He knows if it does not. And I do not mean he checks. I mean he walks into a room and his eyes do a scan, and if anything is a quarter-inch off from where it belongs, he will stand there looking at it until you fix it. She said this without judgment. It was simply a fact about the man she had worked for, the way you might describe the weather in a place you had lived long enough to stop being surprised by it. The dining room. He eats breakfast alone. He eats dinner alone. He does not talk on the phone during meals, but sometimes he reads. If he is reading, do not interrupt. Wait until he sets the paper down. The study. Lorraine stood at the doorway and did not go in. This room you clean only when he is out of the house. Never while he is inside. Touch nothing on the desk. Wipe around it. Dust the shelves, but put every book back in the exact same position. She lowered her voice. He has a system. I have never figured out what it is, but it matters to him, so it matters to you. They moved through the guest bedrooms upstairs, the linen closet organized with such precision it looked like it had been assembled by a machine, the laundry room with its specific folding protocols, the hallway with its row of framed photographs. Lorraine pointed to each room with the familiarity of someone giving a tour of her own home, which in many ways it had been. At the end of the tour, they sat at the small table in the kitchen, and Lorraine poured 2 glasses of cold water and looked at Naomi with an expression that had softened from professional into personal. He is a good man, she said. I need you to know that before I go. He can seem cold at first. All that control, all that quiet. But he is fair. He has never raised his voice at me. Not once in 12 years. Some employers make you feel small. He does not. She paused. He is alone, Naomi. He has been alone for a long time. He has a friend, Terrence, who visits sometimes. Other than that, no one. No wife, no children that I know of. She looked down at her glass. It is a very big house for one person. Naomi looked around at the gleaming counters, the silent hallway beyond, the perfect garden visible through the window. No children that I know of. She did not know why those words settled in her chest and stayed there a moment longer than they should have. She finished her water, thanked Lorraine, and said goodbye at the gate with a promise to arrive at 6:55 on Monday morning. Monday arrived the way Mondays always do, without asking whether anyone was ready for them. Naomi was up at 5:30. She showered, dressed in clean, simple clothes, and made herself a small breakfast of toast and tea that she ate standing at her kitchen counter because her table was covered with things she had been sorting through the night before. She had wanted to leave her apartment tidy before starting the new job. It felt important somehow, like making sure your foundation was solid before you built anything on top of it. She looked at her mother's photograph before she left. Be proud of me today, she said quietly. The woman in the photograph kept laughing, kept tilting her head back, kept looking free. Naomi picked up her bag and went downstairs. She arrived at the estate at 6:55, 5 minutes early. She pressed the intercom and waited, her bag over her shoulder, the morning air cool and carrying the faint green smell of freshly cut grass. The gate opened, but it was not Lorraine who met her. It was Raymond himself, already dressed in his work trousers and white shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his head, moving with the focused energy of a man who had already been awake for an hour and considered the morning well underway. He looked at her, then at the small watch on his wrist, then back at her. 5 minutes early, he said. There was something in his voice that was not quite approval, but lived in the same general area. Good morning, sir, Naomi said. He stepped aside. Lorraine left a binder in the kitchen. Everything she told you is written down in it. Read it today when you have time. He was already turning back toward the house. Coffee is in the third cabinet on the left. The kettle is filled. Yes, sir. I take my breakfast at 7:30. He glanced back once. Not 7:25. Not 7:35. 7:30, Naomi said. He nodded and went inside. Naomi stood in the garden for a moment alone, looking up at the house in the early morning light. The stone facade caught the first gold of sunrise and held it. The windows reflected the sky. The garden stretched out on either side of the gravel path in its perfect geometric arrangements, every flower standing at attention. She breathed in slowly. All right, she thought. Let us begin. She went inside and read Lorraine's binder at the kitchen table while the kettle heated. 40 pages of careful handwriting. She prepared his breakfast exactly as described. Eggs scrambled medium, 2 minutes on medium-low heat after the initial scramble, then off. Wheat toast. Black coffee in the specific ceramic mug. Orange juice in the glass tumbler. She carried it to the dining table at 7:29 and set it down without sound. At 7:30, Raymond walked in, sat down, unfolded his napkin, and looked at the plate. He said nothing. He picked up his fork and began eating. And that, Naomi decided, was good enough. She went back to the kitchen, washed what needed washing, and began the morning's work. The house revealed itself to her over the hours that followed. She moved through it the way water moves through a new channel, finding the contours, learning where to flow and where to pool. The paintings in the hallway were hung at exactly the same height. The books on the study shelves were organized not just by size, but by some internal logic she could not yet decode. The kitchen towels were folded in thirds, not halves. The mat at the front door was always centered, and she could see the faint impression marks on the floor where it had rested in the same position for years. She cleaned and tidied and replaced everything exactly as she found it, and by midday the ground floor was done. She had made lunch, a simple plate of grilled chicken and rice, which she set on the dining table at precisely 1 o'clock, and she was working her way through the upstairs hallway when she paused at the window at the end of the hall. Below her, she could see the back garden and the magnolia tree with its wide spreading branches and the wooden bench beneath it in the shade. It was the one part of the property that looked slightly less disciplined than the rest, slightly more organic, as if it existed under a different set of rules. She wondered again whether he sat there. She went back to her work. The days settled into a rhythm. By the end of the first week, Naomi knew the house the way she knew her own apartment, not just where things were, but how they felt. The particular quality of morning silence when Raymond was deep in his study and the only sounds were the clock in the hallway and the distant hum of the refrigerator. The way the whole house shifted register around 5 o'clock when the day's work was done and the light changed from the sharp clarity of afternoon to the softer amber of evening. The way the gravel in the drive sounded different depending on whether a car was arriving or leaving. She learned to read the house the way a sailor learns to read water, by paying attention to what was visible and inferring what was beneath. Naomi absorbed all of it. She had always been a quick study, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because paying attention was how she had survived every chapter of her life so far. By the end of the first week, she knew the house. Not just the layout, but the feel of it. The way the third stair from the top creaked if you stepped on the outer edge. The way the morning sun moved through the parlor starting at the east window and tracking slowly across the floor until it reached the fireplace by 10. The way the entire house seemed to hold its breath between 1 and 2 in the afternoon when Raymond ate lunch alone and the hallway clock ticked louder in the absence of any other sound. She learned his rhythms too. He was always in his study by 6 in the morning, coffee already made, already deep into whatever occupied him. He moved through the house with deliberate purpose, never wandering, never idle, as if he had decided where he was going before he stood up. He spoke to her only as much as was necessary. A good morning, a brief instruction, a quiet thank you when she set his meals down. But it was not an unfriendly silence. It was simply the silence of a man who had lived alone for a very long time and had grown comfortable inside the walls of his own company. Naomi understood that. She had her own walls after all. They moved around each other in the house like two people sharing a library, aware of the other's presence, respectful of the other's space, never colliding. She noticed things about him that she filed away without knowing why. He talked to himself sometimes in his study, very quietly, when he was working through a problem. She could hear the low murmur of his voice through the closed door, not the words, just the rhythm, the way a person talks when they are their own best sounding board. On Fridays, he poured himself a glass of whiskey in the sitting room after dinner and sat with it for exactly 30 minutes, and then went to bed. He read the financial news in the morning, but turned it off after exactly half an hour, as if he had calculated the precise amount of information he needed and refused to take in a single sentence more. He kept the garden meticulously maintained, but she noticed one area that was different from the rest. The far corner of the back garden, where an old magnolia tree spread its branches wide and low over a wooden bench, was slightly wilder than everything else. The grass was a little longer. A few fallen leaves were left where they landed, as if that one corner had been granted permission to simply be, while the rest of the property was held to a standard of disciplined beauty that left no room for randomness. She wondered if he ever sat on that bench. She wondered what he thought about when the house was empty and the reports were done and there was nothing left to organize or control. She did not ask. It was not her place to ask, and she was a woman who understood boundaries the way she understood everything else, clearly and without resentment. But she wondered. But occasionally, just occasionally, she would look up from her work and find him watching her from across a room. Not in a way that felt intrusive or strange. More like the way a person looks at something when a thought has caught on an edge they cannot identify, when the mind is working on a problem it has not yet brought to conscious attention. Each time it happened, he would look away immediately. So would she. Neither of them mentioned it. It became a small, silent pattern between them, a rhythm within the rhythm of the house, unspoken and unexamined. If you are still with me right now, if this story has you locked in, type, "I'm still here" in the comments. I need to know you are with me for what comes next. It was on a Thursday morning in the second week that something shifted. Raymond had left early for a meeting at the corporate office downtown, and the house was entirely empty in the particular peaceful way it only ever achieved when he was gone. Naomi was cleaning the study, working carefully around the room, dusting the bookshelves, wiping down surfaces without disturbing any of the papers on the desk. She turned to the gallery wall. The study had an entire wall dedicated to framed photographs and awards. She cleaned each frame methodically, lifting, wiping, replacing. A groundbreaking ceremony. A magazine cover. A group photo from an industry gala. Then she picked up a smaller frame near the bottom of the arrangement. It was older than the others. A simple black border, slightly scuffed at the corners from years of being handled and replaced. The photograph inside showed 3 young people, teenagers, standing in what looked like a school courtyard with a concrete wall behind them. The boy in the middle was lean and serious, even then, with sharp dark eyes and an expression that suggested he was already thinking about something more important than having his picture taken. She recognized the jawline, the posture, the particular way he held his shoulders. It was Raymond, decades younger, stripped of the silver hair and the billion-dollar company and the stone walls. On his left stood another boy, bigger, grinning widely, his arm thrown across Raymond's shoulder with the easy familiarity of long friendship. And on his right, slightly turned toward the camera, laughing with her entire face, was a young woman. Dark skin, wide-set eyes, a smile that was not posed but caught in the middle of genuine joy, open and unguarded in a way that seemed almost reckless. Naomi stood very still. She did not set the frame down. She held it and looked at the young woman's face. She knew that face. She had a photograph of that exact face on the shelf above her desk. Older in her version, a few more lines around the eyes, but unmistakably, undeniably the same face. She turned the frame over with careful hands. On the back, in faded pencil that had survived decades of being pressed against the backing, someone had written 3 names in a neat line. Terrence, Raymond, Denise. The room went very quiet. The clock in the hallway ticked. The morning light came through the window and fell across the desk and the bookshelves and the face of a young woman named Naomi who was standing in the study of a man she had known for 2 weeks holding a photograph that contained her entire history. Denise. Her mother's name, written on the back of a photograph hanging on the wall of a billionaire's study. Her mother, young and laughing and alive, standing next to a young man named Raymond. His name was Raymond, her mother had said. He was building something with his life, and a baby did not fit into what he was building. Naomi set the photograph back on the wall. She made sure it was level. She made sure it was exactly where it had been. She picked up her cloth and finished cleaning the rest of the frames with hands that performed their tasks perfectly, while her mind moved through a landscape that had been fundamentally and permanently altered. She did not panic. She had learned a long time ago that panic was a luxury that people without safety nets could not afford. When her mother got sick, she had not panicked. When her mother died, she had cried privately, heavily, in a bathroom stall at the hospital, and then she had stood up and washed her face and walked back out and figured out what came next. She would figure this out too. She did not say anything to Raymond when he came home that afternoon. She served his lunch at 1 o'clock as always. She said good evening at 5 as always. She rode the bus home and climbed the stairs and sat on her bed and looked at her mother's photograph and allowed herself, for the first time in a very long time, to feel the full weight of something she had been carrying in a sealed compartment at the bottom of herself for as long as she could remember. The anger came first. Not loud. Naomi was not a loud person, but deep, like heat from coals that have been carefully banked for years and have never quite gone out. She thought about every Father's Day, the banners in the stores, the cards in the windows, the pastor asking fathers to stand while she looked at the floor and told herself it did not matter. She thought about the school drawing she had never made, the empty space on the construction paper beside herself, and her mother that she had filled with a heart instead of a person because she did not have a person to put there. She thought about every time someone had asked the casual, devastating question, "Where's your dad?" She had learned to shrug it off so smoothly, so automatically, that people stopped asking. She had told herself all her life that she was fine, that her mother had been enough, that the absence of a father was simply the shape of her particular life, and she had accepted it. She wondered now, sitting on the edge of her bed in the failing evening light, how much of that acceptance had been real and how much had been a story she told herself because the alternative, the actual size of what had been taken from her, was too large to carry and still get up in the morning. That Saturday, everything accelerated. Naomi was in the kitchen cleaning up after breakfast when she heard an unfamiliar car pull into the drive. Not the smooth purr of Raymond's sedan, but something louder, more assertive, like a vehicle operated by someone who had never in his life worried about being too much. Then a car door and a voice that carried across the grounds without any apparent effort. "Raymond, get out here. I did not drive 3 hours from Raleigh to talk to your intercom." She heard Raymond's study chair push back, his footsteps down the hall, the front door opening, and then the sound of two old friends greeting each other with the particular combination of warmth and insult that only decades of shared history can produce. The visitor's name was Terrence Wells. He was nothing like Raymond. Where Raymond was contained and precise, Terrence was expansive and unapologetic. A big man with a booming laugh and an open-collared shirt and the energy of someone who had never met a room he could not fill within 30 seconds. He was a retired attorney who had made his money in corporate law and now spent his time traveling and offering unsolicited opinions to everyone he knew. He and Raymond had grown up together, gone to school together, stayed connected across the decades even as their lives took different paths. Naomi brought water to the sitting room. Terrence turned when she entered and paused. His smile stayed on his face, but something behind it recalibrated. His eyes moved across her face slowly, cataloging something his conscious mind had not yet identified. The cheekbones, the eyes, the way she held herself, straight and self-contained. He looked at her for a beat longer than politeness usually allowed. Then his smile returned fully. "Thank you," he said, taking the glass. She went back to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Terrence say something to Raymond in a lowered voice. She could not make out the words. Then Raymond's flat reply. "She started 2 weeks ago. Lorraine recommended her." Terrence made a sound that was half laugh, half something else entirely. She prepared lunch for both of them. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, rice. As she moved between the kitchen and the dining room, fragments of their conversation reached her through the doorway. Old stories, old names, the easy rhythm of men who had known each other for half a century. Then Terrence's voice dropped. Warmer, more careful. You remember back then, Raymond? The last couple years before everything changed? Raymond said something she could not hear. Terrence laughed. You always say that. You remember everything. You just do not like saying so. A pause. Then a name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Denise. Terrence said it clearly, casually, without ceremony. Naomi's hands stopped moving. She was holding a serving dish. She did not set it down. She did not breathe. Terrence, Raymond said. His voice had gone very flat, very still. But Terrence continued. She was something special, Raymond. We both know it. And what you did when she told you about the baby. He paused. I have known you 50 years, and that is still the one thing I have never been able to fully respect you for. That was a lifetime ago, Raymond said. The words sounded like a door being pulled shut. Exactly, Terrence agreed. And here's the strange thing. That young woman out there, your new housekeeper. She looks like her, Raymond. Denise. Around the eyes especially. I noticed it the moment she walked in. In the kitchen, Naomi stood perfectly still. The clock ticked. She breathed out slowly through her nose. She set the dish down. She picked up the water pitcher. She walked back into the dining room with a steady hand and a face that revealed nothing and refilled both glasses. Neither man looked at her strangely. Terrence was already moving on. She returned to the kitchen and stood at the counter and let herself feel exactly what she was feeling, which was the sensation of a puzzle she had been assembling in the dark suddenly being illuminated by a light she had not turned on. That night, long after Terrence had driven away, Raymond sat in his study with only the desk lamp on. He was not working. He was remembering. She looks like her. He had not allowed himself to think about Denise Parker in years. He was a disciplined man. When he decided not to think about something, the decision held. But Terrence's words had slipped past every defense. He thought about a girl with wide eyes and an unguarded laugh. The afternoon she had come to him, 23 years old, hands clasped in front of her exactly the way Lorraine clasped hers, and told him she was pregnant. He had been 33. His company had just started gaining traction. The future was an open road with no speed limit, and a child had felt like a wall built across it. He got up. He walked upstairs to the storage room at the end of the hallway, a narrow room of old files and archived memories. On the bottom shelf, pushed behind everything, was a cardboard box. Brown, soft at the corners from age. He had always known exactly where it was. He carried it to his study and opened it under the lamp. Inside, beneath dust, the past waited exactly where he had left it. School memorabilia, photographs, and at the bottom, a letter. He read it twice. She had written simply and directly, the way she always had. She was keeping the baby. She had waited for him to come back. She understood now that he was not going to. Near the bottom of the first page, this child is not a mistake, Raymond. This child is not a problem to be solved. This child is a person who will exist in this world because we existed together, and I will raise this person to be better than the fear that made you run. I will make myself enough. And on the second page, I am not writing this to punish you. I am writing it because someday, when the world you are building gets very quiet, the guilt will find you on its own. And when it does, I want you to know that I did not raise our child to hate you. I raised our child to be whole. He set the letter down and sat there until the sky outside shifted from black to the deep blue that comes just before morning. Our child. She had kept the baby, and he had never looked. Not once in 30 years. He had built 47 hotels and 3,000 jobs and a fortune measured in billions, and he had never once walked through the door of his own cowardice to find out what was on the other side. He folded the letter and left it on the desk and went to stand at the window. Somewhere across the city, in a third-floor apartment, his daughter was sleeping, and she had no idea. The following week moved with the slow, careful pace of two people circling something enormous. Raymond asked Naomi, in a voice he worked very hard to keep casual, to bring her official documents by Thursday. Employment paperwork. Standard company requirement. She agreed without expression. She brought the envelope. He sat at the kitchen table and opened it and unfolded the birth certificate and read the words he already knew were there. Mother, Denise Elaine Parker. Father, unknown. He put the documents back in the envelope with the care of a man handling something that belonged to someone else. And he knew. He asked her to stay late on Friday. She agreed without asking why. At 7 o'clock, they sat across from each other in the parlor. The two leather chairs. The low table between them. The evening light dying in the tall windows, going from orange to amber to the deep blue of early night. He had turned on the small lamp beside his chair but not the overhead light, so the room was intimate in a way it had never been during the day, the shadows softer, the corners darker, the space between them feeling simultaneously smaller and more charged. He did not speak immediately. He sat on the edge of his chair with his hands loosely clasped, looking at a point somewhere on the floor between them, and she could see him organizing something, the way she had seen him organize everything, carefully, methodically, putting each piece in its right place before presenting the whole. She waited. She had decided before she walked into this room that she would let him go first, that whatever he said, she would listen completely before she responded, that she would not perform any emotion she did not genuinely feel. Then he told her everything. He told her about Denise Parker, not in the general terms of a confession designed to be forgiven, but in the specific, unflinching language of a man who had finally stopped running and was standing still long enough to see what was behind him. He told her about being 33 and afraid and ambitious, and, he said the word without flinching, selfish. About the afternoon Denise had come to him, nervous and young and completely certain, and told him she was pregnant. About the words he had said back to her. Words he described as the worst words he had ever spoken in a life that had included firing people and ending a marriage and making decisions that cost millions of dollars. He told her about the phone calls he stopped answering. About the way he had moved to a different part of the city and changed his number and built a wall of achievement between himself and the thing he had done. About the letter he had found in a box he had not opened in 30 years. About what Terrence had said. About the birth certificate on his kitchen table. Naomi listened to all of it without moving. Her hands were in her lap. Her back was straight. Her face was composed in the way that a person's face is composed when they are concentrating every available resource on holding themselves together, not because they are weak, but because the force of what they are hearing is enormous and they intend to meet it standing up. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. The lamp hummed faintly. A car passed somewhere outside the estate walls, its headlights briefly sweeping across the garden before disappearing. My mother told me your name when I was 7, she said. Her voice was steady and quiet, and carried the weight of every year she had spent carrying this alone. She said you were building something, and a baby did not fit. He looked at the floor. She worked as a home health aide, Naomi continued. She took care of other people's parents. She changed their bandages and measured their medications and read to them from books she never would have chosen herself. She came home exhausted every single night, but she always brought something back for me. A library book. A bag of chocolates. A story that made us both laugh at the dinner table. She made my birthday cakes from scratch every year, even when we could barely afford the ingredients. She braided my hair every morning before school. She came to every single event I ever had and clapped loud enough for 2 people, because she was the only one there. She looked at him directly. She died when I was 15. Pancreatic cancer. She was 38 years old. She held my hand and said my name, and then she was gone, and I was alone. Completely alone. I was placed in a group home. I slept in a room with 3 other girls, and kept my important things in my pillowcase because that was the only space I could control. I was moved to a foster family 6 months later. They were kind. They were also stretched very thin. I finished school on a scholarship, and I have been working to keep myself alive ever since. She paused. And through all of it, every single day of it, I carried a question that I could not answer. Who was the man who walked away from my mother before I was born? Did he know about me? Did he ever once in his life think about what happened to the baby he left behind? Raymond received every word. He did not flinch. He did not deflect. He did not reach for the comfortable words that people reach for when they are drowning in their own guilt. He simply sat there and let it land. I am not ready to forgive you, Naomi said. I need to be clear about that. I do not know when I will be or if I will be. She paused. But I have carried a blank space where a father should have been for 29 years. And now that space has a name and a face. I would rather have the hard truth than the not knowing. He nodded slowly. His eyes were red at the edges. Not from crying, because he had not cried. Not yet. Not in front of her. But from the effort of holding still while everything inside him rearranged itself into a shape he did not recognize and could not control. She could see it on him, the discipline fighting against the feeling, and for the first time since she had walked into this house, she saw him as something other than the composed man in the white shirt behind the mahogany desk. She saw him as a person whose walls had just come down and who did not know what to do with the open air. I have one question, she said. He looked at her. Did you ever think about us? Even once in 30 years. Did you ever wonder what happened to her? To the baby? He did not answer immediately. He sat with the question the way it deserved to be sat with. Not grabbing for the easy answer. Not performing regret. Just being honest with himself for possibly the first time in 3 decades. Yes, he said finally. Not often. I worked very hard to make sure it was not often. But in the quiet moments, the ones I could not fill with work or the next deal or the next building, yes. I wondered. He looked at her. I was too afraid of the answer to go looking for it. That is the truth, and I will not dress it up as anything else. Naomi nodded. She stood up slowly. She picked up her bag from beside the chair. She looked at this man, 63 years old, sitting in an expensive chair in a house full of everything money could buy and nothing it could not. His eyes red, his hands open in his lap. 30 years of avoidance sitting on his face like something heavy that had finally been set down. And she felt something that surprised her. Not forgiveness. That was not here yet, and might not be for a long time. But something else, something her mother had planted in her so deep it had become part of her infrastructure. The capacity to look at a person who had caused enormous harm and see both the harm and the human at the same time. Her mother had given her that. Along with the birthday cakes and the braided hair and the clapping loud enough for 2. Denise had given her the ability to not be consumed by the very anger she had every right to feel. Good night, she said, and the words her did not follow. They both noticed. Neither addressed it. Not yet. She walked out of the house and along the path and through the gate and into the night air that was cool and clean and entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside. She walked to the bus stop. The city moved around her. People heading home, carrying things, talking into their phones. The ordinary world doing its ordinary work. Above the streetlights, a few stars were visible through the urban glow. She sat on the bus and pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and felt the full enormity of what had just happened settle into her like rain soaking into dry ground. The question she had carried since she was 7 was no longer a question. It was still painful and complicated and enormous. It was still something she would have to sit with for a long time before she understood its final shape. But it was no longer empty. And for that night, that was enough. She did not come to work Monday or Tuesday. Raymond did not call. He had promised her time, and he was a man who kept his commitments, even the ones that cost him something. He made his own meals badly. He washed his own dishes slowly. He wandered through the house in a way that would have startled anyone who knew him, without purpose, without direction, simply moving through the rooms and looking at them as if seeing them for the first time. He noticed how quiet the house was without another person in it. He had lived in this quiet for 30 years and had never once registered it as loneliness. He registered it now. On Tuesday evening he sat in the garden on the bench under the magnolia tree, the one corner of his property he had always allowed to remain slightly wild, and he thought about Denise. He had avoided thinking her full name for decades, referring to her in his own mind only as a vague shape, a feeling, a thing that had happened once a long time ago. But now he forced himself to say it properly inside his own head. Denise Elaine Parker. The woman who had laughed in a school courtyard with her whole face exposed. The woman who had written him a letter predicting exactly the moment he was living through right now. The guilt will find you on its own. It had found him. It had been waiting in a cardboard box on a bottom shelf, patient as stone, and it had found him. He sat on the bench until the light was gone, and the garden was dark, and the magnolia was just a shadow overhead. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be for the years he had left. Not the man he had been. That man had built an empire by moving forward without looking back. That man had been very successful and very efficient and had arrived at 63 with 47 hotels and 0 people who called him dad. He wanted to be a different man now. He was not sure he knew how, but he wanted to try. On Wednesday morning, the gate intercom buzzed just after 8. He went to the window and looked down. Naomi was standing outside the gate. She was not wearing her uniform. She had on a simple blue top and dark trousers, her bag over her shoulder, her face calm and certain in the way that it always was, the face of a woman who had made a decision and was not interested in second-guessing it. He went downstairs and opened the gate himself. She looked at him. "I have thought about everything," she said. "I am not ready to be your daughter in the way that word usually means. I do not know when I will be, but I am ready to be in the same room with you and see what that feels like without a uniform between us." She paused. "You said you built something you want to pass on. I want to learn it. The company, the business, from the ground up. Not because you owe it to me, although you do, but because I have spent my whole life working hard and I wanted to lead somewhere." He looked at her for a moment. The morning light was behind her and it caught the edges of her hair, and for one brief instant he saw Denise standing in a school courtyard 30 years ago, laughing, completely unguarded, completely alive. The image was there, and then it was gone, and what remained was Naomi, his daughter, standing at his gate, choosing to walk through it. "Good," he said, simply and warmly. "Good." He made breakfast that morning. The eggs were overdone. The toast was too dark. "It is fine," Naomi said. "It is not fine," he said. "You have been making mine better for 3 weeks." "My mother would have been horrified at those eggs," she said. It came out before she could stop it. He paused. "She had high standards," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. She did. They ate together at the long table that had been set for one for 30 years. It was not comfortable, but it was real. When Lorraine visited that Saturday with a container of homemade stew, she arrived with her usual punctuality and warmth, carrying the container wrapped in a kitchen towel the way she wrapped everything, with care and the quiet pride of a woman who believed that food prepared with love was a form of communication. She rang the bell. Raymond opened the gate. She looked at his face, then past him toward the house, then back. "Something is different," she said. "Come in, Lorraine," he said. "There is something I need to tell you." They went to the sitting room. Naomi was already there in her own clothes. Lorraine stopped in the doorway. She looked at Naomi. She looked at Raymond. She sat down slowly. Raymond told her directly, "Naomi is my daughter, Lorraine. I did not know it when she arrived. She did not know it when she arrived. But it is the truth." Lorraine stared. She pressed both hands over her mouth and sat there for a long moment with bright eyes moving between them. "Your daughter," she whispered. She turned to Naomi. "Did you know? When I brought you here?" "No," Naomi said. "I found out the way you were finding out. One piece at a time." Lorraine looked at the ceiling and made a sound between laughter and tears. "I brought stew," she said in a small voice. "I did not know we were celebrating. But there is enough for 3. Raymond looked at her with something she had never seen on his face before. "I want you to know," he said, "that the reason any of this is possible is because of you. You brought her here. You trusted me with her. I do not know how to properly thank you for that." Lorraine pressed her lips together tightly. She was not going to cry. She had not cried in this house in 12 years. She almost made it. Terrence arrived that afternoon, unannounced as always. He walked into the dining room, where 3 people sat with the remains of stew on the table, and he stopped. His eyes moved from Naomi to Raymond and back. "She is Denise's daughter," he said quietly. "She is my daughter," Raymond said. The word "my" carried a weight it had never carried before. Terrence crossed the room and pulled him into a hug that Raymond held stiffly at first, then returned with one hand on his friend's back. Terrence stepped back, eyes bright. He turned to Naomi. "Your mother," he said, "was one of the finest people I have ever known. She deserved better from us both. I knew what he did, and I did not push hard enough to make him fix it. I am sorry for my part." "Thank you," Naomi said. It was enough. They ate together, all four of them, at a table that had been silent for decades. Lorraine's stew filled the room with warmth. Terrence told stories that made Lorraine shake with laughter. Raymond sat at the head of the table and said little, but the quality of his silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of a man alone. It was the silence of a man who was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where he belonged. Naomi sat beside him. She felt the warmth of it moving through her. Cautious still, careful still, but real. She was not going to pretend everything was resolved. There were decades to reckon with. A relationship that did not yet exist and would have to be built slowly and honestly. But she had a father. A complicated, imperfect, silver-haired man who kept his feelings behind a wall of precision and had spent 30 years running and had finally stopped. She looked at him. He turned. Their eyes met. He did not smile. He simply looked at her with nothing between his face and his feelings. She looked back. For a moment they were just two people. A father and a daughter at the very beginning. A few days later, Naomi came into the kitchen in the morning. Not to work. She was wearing her own clothes. She had left the uniform folded on a chair, and walking away from it felt like setting down something much heavier than fabric. She put the kettle on. Raymond came down and stopped in the doorway. Then he went to the cabinet and took out 2 cups instead of 1 and set them both on the counter. Neither of them made a ceremony of it. It was just 2 cups. The smallest thing. It was everything. Outside, the city was already moving. Construction crews and coffee shops and school buses and commuters, all of them pushing forward the way mornings always push forward, with purpose and routine and the quiet faith that today will be enough to build on. But inside the stone and glass estate, something had changed. The house that had been too large for one person was beginning slowly to fit 2. The silence that had been the silence of absence was becoming, one breakfast at a time, one careful conversation at a time, the silence of something lost now being found. It would not be easy. It would not be fast. Healing never is. But it had begun. And sometimes, in a story that has been waiting 30 years for its next chapter, beginning is enough. I hope you felt every moment of this story the way I felt creating it. If it moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you are subscribed so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I will see you in the next one.